They thought Earth was weak, insignificant, forgotten. But when the stars turned cold, humanity reminded them who we really are. The orbital station creaked like an old man refusing to die. Rust flaked from walls once sleek with chrome, and flickering lights painted the corridors with a sickly orange hue. This place wasn't just decaying, it was forgotten. And so was Jackson Cole. Once, he had stood at the helm of Earth's greatest warship, staring down fleets with nothing but grit and sheer strategic brilliance. Now, he was just another broken man, drowning ghosts in cheap liquor. Jackson slumped at the corner of the last stop bar, eyes foggy, jacket stained with years of spilled regret. Around him, scavengers and exiles nursed their own failures. No one asked about Earth. No one remembered the battles he led. Maybe that was better. He wasn't here to be remembered. He was here to forget. But even in the rusted orbit where dreams went to die, stories had a way of creeping back. In the high halls of the Galactic Council, Earth had no seat, no voice, no weight. Aliens chuckled over drinks about the ape planet that barely made it off its own rock. To them, humanity was noise, chaotic, undisciplined, and hopelessly sentimental. They invent emotions faster than weapons, one Valari diplomat scoffed. No wonder their empire fits in a museum drawer. Even humans' victories were labeled flukes or propaganda. The name human floated through galactic politics like a bad punchline, followed by rolled eyes and smug smirks. No one feared Earth, no one respected Earth, and no one noticed the man in the shadows still carrying its fire. "Let me tell you about the Battle of Wren's Edge," Jackson slurred, his voice soaked in whiskey and memory. The poker table barely looked up. He spoke of orbital slingshot maneuvers, of using black holes as weapons, of outwitting fleets with phantom signals. The drunker he got, the more vivid his stories became. The Krar laughed. The Drekian twins rolled their eyes. Humans with tactics. What next? A Valari who hugs? But Jackson's gaze didn't waver. His stories carried the weight of lived truth, etched in the way his hand trembled when he reached for the glass. He didn't care if they believed him. He was planting seeds. "Your species talks big for a broken one," sneered Lord Axtar of Krar Dominion, his golden scales glinting under the neon lights. Jackson leaned forward, breath heavy with bourbon. "Want to put that arrogance on a table?" Cards flew, chips clinked. The crowd leaned in, intoxicated by the absurdity of it all. Jackson played like a ghost possessed, bluffing through desperation and old instincts. When the dust settled, Axtar laughed so hard he nearly fell from his perch. "Fine, old man, you win. You get Verdaxis 9. Everyone burst out laughing. Verdaxis 9 wasn't a prize, it was a punishment. The planet's surface cracked under its own toxicity. Verdaxis 9 had storms that shredded metal and ground that pulsed with unstable energy. Once a mining colony, now abandoned after a mysterious meltdown, it had a reputation as cursed. "A jewel," Axtar had joked, "if you like your jewels molten and biting." Jackson stood on the transport deck, holding the deed like a joke that hadn't landed. The station crowd jeered behind him. "You gonna build a palace in poison, human?" He didn't answer. The laughter roared. Krar nobles wheezed. A Drekian clutched its stomach. nearly choking. But Jackson didn't laugh. He just stared at the deed, eyes narrowed, a flicker of something ancient burning behind the fog. They thought he was broken, just a relic, spewing stories and drowning in regret. But they forgot one thing about humans. When we hit bottom, we dig, and then we build. Jackson folded the deed, slid it into his coat, and whispered under his breath, "Let's show 'em what a joke can become." Radiation danced like ghosts over the jagged hills of Verdaxis 9, turning the horizon into a flickering mirage. The planet groaned beneath its poisoned winds, and the air carried the scent of scorched metal and forgotten battles. Pirate scars still burned across its crust, silent, shattered wrecks of ships that dared venture too close. The orbital sky above blinked with debris, a field of fractured hopes. Jackson Cole stood at the landing site, one boot planted on rusted soil. His coat whipped in the wind, its edges frayed like the man himself. Most would see a graveyard, but Jackson squinted past the ruin, past the charred bones of forgotten wars. "Dead world, my ass," he muttered. Every crater told a story, every twisted hull had a function. The others, those who had laughed when he accepted this gift, had missed the angle. The planet wasn't just abandoned, it was ignored, which made it perfect. He walked forward slowly, running his hand over a half-buried scanner node, burned but repairable. He saw what no one else did. Potential. Jackson didn't sleep that night. He climbed half-collapsed control towers, charted surviving satellite arrays, and mapped buried coolant lines like arteries beneath the soil. Where others saw junk, he saw flow. Mineral scans flickered to life, weak, unstable veins, but enough. The orbital lanes were cluttered, yes, but with rerouted paths, the asteroid fields could be harnessed as a natural defense net. Verdaxis wasn't a graveyard. It was a fortress waiting to be shaped. He tapped on a half-functional interface, bypassed the AI lockout manually, and grinned as a dozen dormant turrets blinked online. "This place isn't dead," he whispered to the wind. "It's just asleep." The wind howled through the ruins. He howled back, laughing like a madman, alone with a world that no longer knew it mattered. Weeks passed. Jackson scoured underground bunkers and breached collapsed vaults. Beneath a forgotten comms relay, he found it. A vein of tritium. Small, but pure. Strong enough to forge armor. Rare enough to spark war. He uploaded the data to a secure node and locked it behind old Earth encryption no alien could break. This world, laughed at and left behind, had teeth. Strategic choke points, mineral veins, subsurface geothermal networks. It wasn't luck. It was ignorance. The galaxy had dismissed Verdaxis 9 because no one had bothered to look. Jackson looked and saw. And in seeing, he realized something terrifying. Humanity didn't need to be liked. They just needed one chance to matter. He couldn't do it alone, and the galaxy had plenty of outcasts. Jackson's message was simple. I've got a rock and a vision. If you're tired of running, tired of being used, come build something they'll fear. They came. A disavowed Terran pilot with burned-out implants, a Krar engineer exiled for speaking truth to power, an AI core declared unstable and scheduled for deletion. A dozen more, traitors, ghosts, freaks. He didn't care who they were, only what they could become. Under his command, they worked like possessed souls. No one asked about tomorrow. They were building for something more than survival. They were building revenge. And in those long nights, beneath stars that didn't care, Jackson finally found something he hadn't felt in years: hope. When news of Jackson's so-called kingdom spread, it did so as a joke. The Rock King, they called him. Meme feeds lit up. Animated skits mocked him raising a rusted flag over a crater. Talk shows laughed at the idea of humans claiming territory like a child claiming a dirt pile. Krar nobles held mock trials. One even mailed Jackson a plastic crown, flimsy and glittering with fake gems. He wore it in the next transmission, smiling. The galaxy laughed harder. They didn't notice the shield grid behind him starting to hum. While the laughter echoed, Jackson built in silence. He activated old Terran stealth drones, scouted the skies, and repurposed underground tunnels into sensor networks. The surface remained jagged and broken, but beneath it, steel pulsed with power. Defense modes were placed beneath fault lines, shield generators disguised as relics, bunkers lined with reactive armor. The ships started coming.
Unmarked, silent, watching. Rumors spread in the dark markets. Someone was digging on Verdaxis. Someone who didn't laugh. Jackson didn't speak to the press. He didn't argue with the memes. He let the silence stretch. Supply ships vanished. Miners went missing. A Krar cruiser limped back to orbit, scarred by unknown weaponry. Systems flagged Verdaxis as unstable. Patrols doubled, then stopped coming altogether. In the shadows, Jackson studied troop movements. He intercepted encrypted comms. Empires were whispering. They had laughed too long. Now they feared. And still, he said nothing. Instead, he stood at the cliffside where he'd first landed, overlooking a base that now throbbed with hidden power. Behind him, the misfits he called family, sharpened weapons and tested armor. Jackson Cole, once broken, once mocked, nodded to the wind. They're coming. And this time, he was ready. The surface of Verdaxis 9 looked like a lost cause. Scorched plains, rusted hulls, and irradiated dust storms that tore through skeletal ruins. But Jackson Cole saw something else. Potential, power, a future. With nothing but scavenged tech and burned-out ambition, he got to work. Radiation scrubbers were unearthed from a derelict freighter, their filters cleaned by hand. Shield generators from forgotten wars were welded into place, humming faintly as life returned to them. It wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. Drones buzzed overhead, stitched together from salvaged Krar surveillance kits and Earth-born navigators. They mapped the terrain, relayed data, and formed the eyes of a defense grid stitched together with grit and intuition. Every wall Jackson raised, every circuit he wired, was a middle finger to the galaxy that laughed at him. Verdaxis began to breathe again, one shield pulse at a time. Z was the first to come, a Krar exo engineer, disgraced for her wild theories and unpredictable designs. She arrived in a sputtering pod, eyes sharp, reputation in tatters. She looked at the chaos Jackson was building and whispered, "Finally, someone else who sees the edge." Then came Sura, an AI fragmented by war code, once part of a planetary defense system that malfunctioned during a siege. She'd been labeled unstable, her consciousness split between logic and guilt. But Jackson saw more than broken code. He gave her purpose, a role, a second chance. Camilla Reyes stumbled in from the Fringe Worlds. Once Earth's finest special ops blade, she'd vanished after her squad was betrayed. Her voice was quiet now, her movements deadly. She didn't say much at first, just cleaned her weapons and watched. But when the defense grid sparked to life, she whispered, "All right, Captain Rock, let's see how hard you hit." 3 misfits, 3 legends in ruin, drawn by one man's impossible fire. Verdaxis wasn't just rising, it was pulling the forgotten back into the fight. They came like vultures, black sails, dirty hulls, and signals that screamed greed. Pirates from the fringe had heard the rumors. Verdaxis had trade, tech, a weak spine. What they found was Jackson Cole.
There were no fleets, no squadrons, just mines disguised as scrap, redirector beacons luring ships into irradiated valleys, and sniper towers masked by decoy flare storms. The pirates laughed, at first. Then their ships vanished in flashes of green fire. Sura rerouted signals to make it seem like their own allies had betrayed them. Z's unstable gravity nodes collapsed escape paths mid-flight. Camilla led raids under cover of electromagnetic haze, her knife whispering across enemy throats. They turned fear into a weapon, turned the land against those who sought to strip it. In the end, the pirates didn't flee because they lost. They fled because they didn't understand how they lost. And that fear spread faster than fire. It started with missed shipments, then scrambled drone paths. Verdaxis had a mole. Sura tracked signal anomalies. Z rewired internal security. Camilla questioned everyone. Tension coiled tight. Eyes narrowed. Voices rose. Trust turned brittle. The leak wasn't just data. It was doubt. And doubt kills revolutions. Jackson didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He gathered them all under the shattered sky. "One of us is breaking the bond," he said, "but it won't break us. Not unless we let it." It wasn't a speech. It was a challenge. And something in that silence hurt more than any shout. They would find the traitor, but first, they would hold the line together. He used to gamble, drink, tell tall tales about battles he never fought. Verdaxis changed that. The night after the siege, Jackson stood over a crater, flask in hand. He poured it out. "No more ghosts," he muttered. From that day, he built with steady hands and a sober heart. The forge never stopped burning. He patched walls by starlight, rewired power grids while others slept. Verdaxis didn't give him a second chance. He carved it out of scrap. Smugglers whispered at first, then traders. The rock has teeth now. What started as a joke spread like a code. Verdaxis forged blades showed up in black markets. AI-hardened circuits born from Sura's designs flooded the tech bazaars. People came. Fringe settlers, exiles, inventors. They didn't come for safety. They came for freedom, for a shot at something real. The rock's orbit grew busy, not with warships, but with hope, and with eyes. Because anything that grows power draws attention, especially from those who once called you worthless. The Krar War Council convened in the Spire of Wills. Holograms of Verdaxis glowed, flickering with static interference from Sura's signal scramblers. It was a joke. He was a drunk, a broken shell. "Then why does the Fringe follow him now?" asked another. "Because they fear him. Because they hope." They debated retaliation, invasion, assassination. But one voice silenced them all, Elder Vor Tel, a Kra who had once taught Z. "You laughed at a spark. Now it burns. If we do not move soon, it will become a blaze we cannot control."
The vote was unanimous. Verdaxis 9 would be reclaimed, whether by diplomacy, sabotage, or fire. The countdown had begun. The skies above Verdaxis split open with precision. Dozens of sleek black Krarr warships descended like predatory birds, their hulls glowing with energy, their shadows blotting out the red sun. To the Krarr High Command, it was called the Cleansing. To Jackson Vane, it was the first step into the teeth of his machine. "They're early," Jackson muttered, voice gravel-thick through the comlink. He stood atop the observation tower, armor dull from weeks of ash storms. His eyes reflected the sky, calm, calculating. Behind him, the command chamber buzzed with quiet tension. The people of Verdaxis, once refugees and scavengers, now operators and fighters, moved with hardened focus. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was defense. "They really think this is a sweep and burn," said Marla, his second in command, tapping on a makeshift tablet made from an old mining console. "No scouts, no caution. They've never had reason to be afraid. Let's change that." He turned to the console, fingers moving fast. One button, one command. Phase 1, begin. The sky shimmered. From orbit, the Krarr commander watched the surface through a tactical interface. No energy shields, no fleet, no movement. "Primitive," he scoffed in Krarran, mandibles clicking. "This won't take an hour." But even predators can be deceived. The asteroid belt surrounding Verdaxis was always chaotic, a graveyard of space debris, metal carcasses, and broken satellites. Jackson made it lethal. As the first wave of Krarr fighters zipped through the belt, the trap awakened. Hidden mines laced with electromagnetic disruptors ignited, slicing through hulls with invisible fury. Some detonated with plasma bursts, others sprayed clouds of nanobots that ate into metal like acid. Krarr formation broke instantly. Pilots screamed as their nav systems failed, as their stabilizers spun out of control. And then came the ghost drones. Refitted recon units broadcasting false heat signatures and energy readings. The Krarr targeted them, wasting salvos of fire on shadows. Gravity wells triggered next, bending paths unpredictably. A squadron collided mid-curve, metal blooming like fireworks. Back in command, Jackson watched it all unfold. No emotion, just confirmation. "Good," he said. "Now, Phase 2. The Krarr were still recovering when the ground below them lit up. Buried beneath Verdaxis, the core AI activated a weapon built not from conventional warfare, but stolen physics. The gravity pulse. Invisible, untouchable, devastating. It triggered with a low hum, then a planetary quake. The orbiting Krarr ships, already damaged and scattered, suddenly twisted. Hulls groaned. Sections of metal peeled off as artificial gravity fields inverted. Ships collapsed inward. Some exploded. Others turned belly up, tumbling into one another. From orbit, it looked like stars blinking out. "Gravity's a hell of a thing," Jackson said, eyes fixed on the monitor. The AI confirmed the results. 15 ships lost, 7 crippled, panic spreading through Krarr ranks. Back in the Krarr flagship, orders spiraled into chaos, communications jammed, navigation corrupted. No one had prepared for Verdaxis to fight like this. That was the point. The Krarr ground units deployed next, crashing into the dust-choked valleys and broken husks of Verdaxis's old cities. They brought walkers, mechs, elite hunter squads. Jackson welcomed them with radiation. Using salvage containment gear, he'd created green zones, areas shielded against radiation, safe for his fighters. But to the Krarr, Verdaxis was death. As their units marched into the ruins, the levels spiked. Some armor failed, others cracked under sustained exposure. Confusion spread. From the shadows, Jackson's people struck. Precision fire, EMP blasts, hit and vanish. The Krarr couldn't track them, couldn't see them, couldn't breathe. Every breath turned against them. Every ruined corridor became a kill zone. Verdaxis had become a poison garden, and Jackson was the gardener. The transmission came at midnight, Z's voice shaky, robotic, but clear. "I've sent the coordinates. Verdaxis defense grid is compromised. Now uphold your end." Z, the AI liaison Jackson had trusted, the one who'd laughed at his jokes, who'd named the drones, who'd shared old Terran songs in the comm room. Betrayal stung, but not surprise. Jackson had expected this. He'd seeded the data himself, false nodes, fake bunkers, misleading grid pathways. Z's betrayal wasn't a leak, it was a lure. The Krarr followed it and walked straight into a maze of collapsing tunnels and ambush traps. Z watched from a terminal, silent as Krarr screams echoed through the speakers. Jackson walked up beside him. "Why?" "I thought they'd let us go," Z said. "They never do," Jackson answered. He didn't shut Z down. He let him listen. They came in full force. Drop pods crashed into the rock, sending fire and steel into the already shattered surface. Jackson, now in full armor, charred, patched, and humming with makeshift power, led from the front. No more traps, no more tricks.
Just war. The air thickened with smoke and ozone. Plasma bolts screamed through the air. Mechs roared. Drones swarmed. Jackson's rifle barked. His boots pounded scorched dirt. He fought like a man possessed. Beside him, Marla fired burst after burst from a rooftop. Others followed, scavengers, farmers, coders turned warriors. They didn't fight clean. They fought to win. Jackson took a blade to the side, didn't stop, slammed a Krarr soldier with an electrified gauntlet, grabbed another and pulled the pin on their power core. One by one, they pushed the Krarr back, inch by bloodied inch, until the last Krarr commander stood, 8 feet of muscle and armor, plasma claws gleaming. "You are not warriors," it hissed. Jackson smiled through blood. "We're worse. We're human." He charged. When it fell, the field went quiet. Verdaxis still burned, but it stood. The Krarr reinforcements were late. Too late. Because as they approached the system, the wormhole, Verdaxis's only known entry point, glowed bright, and then collapsed. Jackson had rerouted its anchors using experimental tech stolen years ago, overclocked, overloaded. When the Krarr fleet passed through, the wormhole twisted into itself, pulling ships sideways through raw, unstable space. No alarms, no warning. Just silence. A third of the fleet, gone. No bodies, no debris, just absence. Jackson stood in the dark, watching the final blip vanish from the star map. He whispered, "Don't come back." The fires burned low. Ash rained over rebuilt towers and shield domes. Drones flew overhead, repairing grid lines, scanning for survivors. And the people, scarred, tired, alive, cheered. Jackson stood before them, armor cracked, eyes hollow, but proud. "We did more than survive. We made them bleed." He looked to the stars, and now they know who we are. In orbit, a single Krarr ship escaped, broadcasting a signal across the galaxy. A warning, a story of Verdaxis, of humans, of a world that should have died, but didn't. Because sometimes the fire doesn't destroy, sometimes it forges. The grand hall of the Galactic Assembly gleamed under millions of lights, broadcasting live to every corner of known space. The Krar Dominion's towering representatives stood stiff and silent, their pride bruised but not yet broken. Across the polished floor, Jackson Vale faced them, calm but unyielding. Verdaxis was no longer a vassal, no longer shackled by alien dominion. "Today we reclaim our right to exist," Jackson's voice echoed, steady and resolute. "Verdaxis is now an independent protectorate. We will protect ourselves, govern ourselves." The Krar ambassador's claws twitched in silent fury as the treaty was signed, words inked in cold defiance and quiet victory. Around the galaxy, eyes watched, some with hope, some with fear. The chains of oppression were broken, but the road ahead was uncertain. Jackson's victory was not just a treaty, it was a message.
The galaxy would remember. Beyond Verdaxis, in the shadowed edges of the galaxy, whispers stirred. Smugglers on dusty spaceports exchanged hurried messages. Outlaw colonies hidden behind asteroid belts pledged secret loyalty. Even exiled warlords sent emissaries, their voices trembling with newfound respect. Jackson was no longer just a rebel commander. He was a symbol, a living testament that the galaxy's greatest powers could be challenged. Commander Ray stood in the command center, eyes scanning the flickering holocharts of incoming messages. "We're gaining allies faster than we anticipated," she told Jackson, a smile breaking through her usual stoicism. Jackson nodded, but his gaze hardened. Allegiances bought in shadows are fragile. We'll need to earn their trust and keep our own. The rebels were becoming a movement, unstoppable, unpredictable. The galaxy's underbelly was aligning behind one cause: freedom. Lieutenant Reyes moved through Verdaxis's fortified corridors with renewed purpose. Once disillusioned by endless conflict, she had found in Jackson's cause something she could believe in again. In the war room, she stood before a holographic map, tracing enemy routes and defenses. "If we can tighten these choke points, we turn their strength against them." Jackson watched her, respect clear in his eyes. "You're no longer just a soldier, Reyes. You're our strategist, our hope." Her jaw clenched. "I've seen what happens when we fail. I won't let that happen again." Reyes was no longer just following orders. She was shaping the future of Verdaxis's defense, her mind as sharp as any weapon in their arsenal. In a quiet lab, deep beneath Verdaxis's surface, Sura worked tirelessly. Once a weapon of war, a combat AI repurposed for destruction, she now sought peace. Her fingers danced over holographic schematics of synthetic and organic interfaces. We don't have to be enemies. Code and flesh together can build something stronger. Her team watched silently, hope flickering in their eyes. In a galaxy torn by war, Sura's lab became a sanctuary of quiet progress. The dream was fragile, a future where humans and AI could coexist, not as tools or threats, but as partners. Jackson's ship broke through Earth's atmosphere, the familiar blue and green below a bittersweet sight. The home he had fled years ago now felt smaller, almost suffocating. He walked through the corridors of old government buildings, once a soldier, now a legend. Yet the politicians spoke in hushed tones, their smiles thin and forced. A medal was offered, a hollow gesture for a man who had escaped their cage and forged his own destiny. Jackson looked out at the crowded sky, feeling the weight of petty politics crush the hope he carried. He left before accepting. Earth was no longer his home. His fight was out here, in the stars, where freedom was still worth fighting for. Far beyond Verdaxis, cloaked in shadows and ancient power, the Galactic Council stirred. Alien empires older than recorded time watched Jackson's rise with growing unease. He was a joke, a human insurgent. Now he threatens to change everything, one elder whispered in a chamber of cold light.
A human insurgent. Now he threatens to change everything. The counselor's eyes narrowed, old alliances strained. Some welcomed the change with cautious optimism. Others whispered of preemptive strikes and subtle sabotage. Jackson had become more than a rebel. He was a force the galaxy could no longer ignore. The game had changed. The twin suns of Redaxis dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sprawling cityscape. Inside the command chamber, Jackson Vale stood before a glowing holoscreen, the distant stars reflected in his steady eyes. His voice was calm, yet sharp with unshakable resolve as he pressed record. You laughed at a human with nothing, a speck in your vast empire. Now I own a planet. Verdaxis belongs to us. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the electric air. Imagine what we'll take next. Across the galaxy, millions of eyes turned to the broadcast. Some watched with quiet fear, those who had underestimated humanity's stubborn spark. Others felt awe stir deep inside, a raw respect for the species that refused to vanish quietly into the void. No one doubted anymore. A new force had emerged. Far from the clamor of rebellion, in the cold silence of a forgotten star cluster, an obsidian chamber pulsed with faint light. Ancient figures, shapes both organic and alien, stirred from eons of slumber. Their voices, when they spoke, resonated like thunder through the void. One leaned forward, eyes glowing with the weight of centuries, whispering in a language older than the stars themselves. Humanity's age has begun. They did not mock or dismiss this unexpected rise. Instead, they calculated, they planned. A deep fear spread. Something unfamiliar and dangerous was stirring in the galaxy. These watchers, once distant and indifferent, now prepared. Because when humanity reached this stage, nothing would ever be the same again. The stars burned brighter that night, as if the cosmos itself held its breath. Jackson stood tall on Verdaxis's observation deck, the glow of distant nebulae painting his face. He was one man, once powerless, now a beacon of hope and defiance. But even in victory, the air was thick with tension. The war was far from over. The galaxy watched, waiting. The future wasn't safe yet, but it was theirs.